Welcome to Cali High episode 65, the Gare Du Nord. I'm your host, Cenzo Nico, also known as Vince Nicoletti, and this is the fifth episode in a new series called A Work in Progress, a Retrospective of Adventures. The Gare Du Nord is a cautionary traveler's tale which begins in a rainstorm in Studio City and takes us through Paris, Tunis, and Amsterdam, and ends on a Eurostar train bound for Florence, Italy. Gare Du Nord. I met my present wife walking in Studio City during a torrential rainstorm in December 2002. I had woken up to the rain pounding outside, and it was December, and I was on vacation at home. I thought to myself, if I never get out of the house, I'm never going to meet anyone. I had broken up with my last girlfriend of 5 years, 6 months earlier. So I went back to bed and slept another 2 hours. When I woke up again, the rain was pouring. I got dressed, had some coffee, rolled a reefer, and grabbed my coat and umbrella. Venturing forth from the apartment, I went down by the LA River Aqueduct, commonly referred to as the Wash. The water was 4 feet from the top and moving at a good 30-mile-per-hour clip. I lit the reefer, took a hit, and after observing the water passing by, crossed Coldwater. Walking behind the Sportsman's Lodge along the Wash, I came up on the edge of an office building parking lot next to the Pins Bowling Alley. 2 girls were trying to get from their car to the building. Sharing my umbrella, I helped them get in. Crossing the boulevard, I went into the Native American art store. There was some beautifully crafted silver and turquoise jewelry on display, which I later came back to buy. Heading west along the south side of Ventura Boulevard, I ended up on the southwest corner of Coldwater and Ventura. A young lady was standing waiting to cross the boulevard. She had no umbrella, was dressed in jeans, and had a waist-length windbreaker-type raincoat with the hood pulled over her hair. The light turned green and I stepped off the sidewalk into the crosswalk, umbrella in hand, wearing my stepfather's old lederhosen button-up gray wool coat that he got in Germany after World War II. He was a retired U.S. Army colonel, and the coat was iconic. Somehow I inherited it. Halfway through crossing the street, I made up my mind to stop and wait for the girl, who had fallen somewhat behind me. She caught up with me on the corner in front of Twain's, and I turned and asked her, "Would you like to share my umbrella?" She said, "Thanks. This reminds me of my country." We started walking down Coldwater under my umbrella. "Where are you from?" I looked into her eyes for the first time. They were captivating. Her face was wreathed with the hood of her jacket pulled tight around it. "Tunisia," she replied. I knew where it was, and I knew the name of the capital. "Are you from Tunis?" She was surprised. "Yes." She glanced at me. We kept walking. The rain was torrential. While we walked, I asked her if she liked Algerian rhyme music. This got her attention as well. Some white guy in Ventura who knew of North African culture. We talked about some of our favorite Algerian singers, Cheb Khaled and Cheb Mami, and others and kept walking. We got to where she was going, a duplex on Moorpark Street, and the rain had never let up. I asked her to take my number, and she wrote it with a lipstick liner pen on a strip from a brown paper bag. After she went in, I folded my umbrella and went skipping through puddles with the rain still falling, back to my apartment. The umbrella itself had a note I had written years earlier on the name tag inside the clear plastic handle. It read, "This is a magic umbrella. If you try to use it, you may turn into a frog." By early the next year, we were married, and by 2006, it was time to go to Tunisia to meet the in-laws and have a traditional Tunisian marriage and explore Tunisia. The plan was to fly Air France into Paris, hang out with my wife's Parisian relatives, and then fly to Tunis. After Tunisia, Italy would be our major destination, and we were anxious to spend some time there after having studied a few semesters of Italian with Giovanni Trombetta at LA Valley College. We flew Air France from Los Angeles. My wife's Uncle Fateh and her aunt's boyfriend Ali met us at the airport. We had so many bags of luggage that we needed 2 cars to move ourselves and our luggage from the airport. A bit of an argument ensued over who was going to put which bags in which car and who would ride with whom. I ended up with Ali, and my wife rode with her Uncle Fateh. We got such a tiny room near the Eiffel Tower that our luggage filled up the entire walking space in the room, and only the bed, balcony, and bathroom were free spaces we could stand or sit in. Paris was and is beautiful. The Eiffel Tower, an amazing feat of steel architecture built in 1889 along the banks of the Seine. The Arc de Triomphe, built in 1836 to honor the armies of the Revolution and the Empire, and where you can learn to drive in a chaotic turnstile, which I had mastered years earlier on my bicycle. The Champs-Élysées, one of the 12 avenues that lead right to the Arc de Triomphe, and where you can find a groovy cafe to grab a bite. There was also the Buddha Bar, a hip restaurant club in the basement of the Ritz Hotel, where a cool DJ was spinning world beats. One cannot forget the Louvre, a great museum with a glass pyramid we've all seen in movies, and the lesser-known Bois de Boulogne, a large park to ride your bike through and do other nefarious things in. And finally, the River Seine, which snakes around Paris with bridges covered in ornate statuary. We hung out a few days partying with my wife's uncles, aunts, and cousins. Her Aunt Monia's boyfriend, Ali, drove a Mercedes limo and chauffeured us around the city. After a few days, we left Paris for Tunis. We had a rocking wedding party on the roof of my father-in-law's house, including the coolest Tunisian band with an amazing singer. I got to know my 3 very cool brothers-in-law, and we hung out in La Marsa, a happening beach town just north of Tunis. We explored the country guided by Mohandas, my father-in-law. We visited the north coast along the Mediterranean, went up into the Atlas Mountains, toured an ancient Roman town with subterranean houses, beautifully tiled and masterfully built, all the while eating Tunisian cuisine wherever we went. When it was time to leave Tunisia, we flew back to Paris to take the train to Amsterdam, and from there we would hop back on the train south to Italy, transiting through Paris once more. However, the whole Tunisian story deserves its own chapter and will be told in a future episode. When we landed back in Paris, Ali picked us up at the airport and drove us to the Gare Du Nord, Paris's northern train station. He warned me not to bring anything back from Amsterdam as we were driving to the train station. I respectfully declined to mention my plans to take some stash to Italy, so as not to worry anyone. Ali dropped us at the station, and from there we took the TGV, France's sleek high-speed train, to Amsterdam. We would come back to the station on the way to Italy. The Gare Du Nord was built in 1846. The main hall terminus has a gently sloping A-frame ceiling covering the trains. Semicircular windows line the sides, and ornate iron pillars hold up the main beams of the ceiling. As the train pulls out of the station, the tracks take you through the backside of old Paris neighborhoods north of the station, lined with old brick buildings and their soot-covered chimneys, eventually giving way to suburbs and then farmlands stretching into the distance. Once out of the city, the train accelerated to 200 miles per hour, and the near scenery raced by in a blur as the distant countryside passed by a little bit slower, but still at a good clip. We arrived in Amsterdam and took the subway into town from the train station. Amsterdam, for those who have never been there, is an adult Disneyland of sorts, and having been there before, I decided 3 days would be more than enough. We checked into the Hotel American, which is now called the Hard Rock American Hotel, located off the center square of the Leidsplein, right across from the Bulldog Cafe, Amsterdam's most famous coffee shop, or dispensary, as we call them here. The difference is that in Amsterdam, it's a coffee shop where you can drink coffee and other non-alcoholic beverages, buy cannabis products, and smoke them right there in the coffee shop. The oddity about the Bulldog Cafe, however, is that upstairs from the basement coffee cannabis shop is the Bulldog Bar, where tourists quaff fresh Heinekens on tap in large mugs. In the coffee shop part, people were smoking cannabis and were so stoned from hanging in the smoky room that they weren't talking. Reggae was playing and no one was engaged in any interaction or conversation unless it was asking the bartender for more coffee or cannabis. However, walk outside and upstairs to the bar, and the conversations were so loud above the music you could hardly hear yourself think. During our stay, my wife and I walked around the back streets and along the canals exploring Amsterdam. I found a great coffee shop called Danskrieg, and later I returned and purchased hashish of a few varieties. My favorite was made from the White Widow strain, super tasty and strong, and it reminded me of the old Afghan Primo brought in by the Brotherhood of Eternal Love to Laguna Beach back in the 60s. I bought an ounce in total and met my wife back at the Hotel American. Later, we decided to get something to eat, and down a side street we found a Thai restaurant. We went in and ordered some food, but when I started speaking Thai to the waitress, who appeared to be Thai, she didn't understand one word. As a matter of fact, none of the Asians running the place spoke Thai at all. By now, the jig was up, and I figured they were Filipinos masquerading as Thais. And as one might imagine, the food tasted nothing like Thai food, even though it had a vaguely familiar look about it. As I said, we only stayed 3 days, and some of the most memorable moments were walking in Vondel Park and hanging out in pubs by the canals, drinking large flagons of fresh Heineken. We missed the Van Gogh Museum with a promise to ourselves to visit next time. We boarded the train for Paris and Amsterdam, where upon arrival we would take a taxi from the Gare du Nord to the Gare Lyon and hop on a southern-bound train to Italy. Fields of multicolored tulips passed by as the train sped south. It stopped in Brussels, Belgium for about a half an hour. While waiting at the Brussels South railway station, we got out and I took a few hits of a reefer I had while standing at the end of a platform behind a little hut, a little way away from my wife. After a few minutes, a voice from the overhead speaker rang out. "Now departing for Paris. And we got back on the train and sat back in our seats once again, watching the pastoral countryside speed by. We were going straight on to Florence, or Firenze, as it is called in Italian. There, we would begin our stay up in the hills above Florence, in Fiesole, at the Pensione Vincista, a converted villa across the street from Leonardo da Vinci's house, built in the 1400s. The Vincista serves incomparable wine from its own vineyard and cooks up wonderful multi-course communal dinners every night. The thing about trains in Paris is that there are 6 train stations that send travelers in different directions depending upon the desired destinations. Coming from Amsterdam by way of Brussels, we would arrive in Paris back at the Gare Du Nord and would need to take a taxi across Paris to the Gare Lyon and board a Eurostar train south to Italy. Most of the train stations in Paris were built over 100 years ago and are wonderful architectural feats in themselves, with high arched ceilings over the platforms under which sleek modern trains in all colors pull in and await the change of riders and direction. All sorts of people are hurrying this way and that to get on board or to leave the station. The Gare du Nord is the busiest train station in Europe. A little background here is in order. Since my wife had not been home in years when we went to Tunisia, we were carrying presents, mostly clothes, for a host of family members, and so we had giant suitcases, which we had purchased in downtown LA, full of clothes for everyone. Each of us had 2, as well as a smaller bag apiece. But now the suitcases were full of items acquired in Tunisia. Beautiful clothing, souvenirs, and all sorts of special herbs for my mother-in-law. And I had my backpack with our passports and my hashish. We hauled our bags off the train and started walking down the platform into the station. My wife was walking faster than I, and she had gotten ahead of me by about 40 feet and was about 2 steps behind another female with large bags. Seemingly from out of nowhere, French plainclothes police surrounded them. A woman cop stopped in front of my wife and said, "Arrête," the French command for stop. My wife speaks French, and I could hear her speaking to the woman cop. The other girl who was in front of my wife had been stopped also and was being questioned by another cop. I took this in as I strode to catch up. Some small voice in my head said, "You've got to stop as well." "Obviously," another voice said. The cops were directing the girls to put down their bags and open them, but I had the keys, with our passports and my hashish in my backpack. My wife was putting the bags flat on the station floor. The plainclothes squad consisted of 2 women, 4 men, and a dog. Dragging my suitcases with a bit of apprehension and dread, I walked up and asked what was going on. The man in charge of the operation, and we'll just call him Inspector Clouseau, asked me in a thick French accent, "Who are you?" "I'm her husband," I said, pointing to my wife. who by this time was standing next to me asking for the keys to the locks on the suitcases. Inspector Clouseau, a dark-haired middle-aged cop, looking and sounding typically French, asked for our passports. By this time, the dog had begun sniffing through the girl's luggage who had been in front of my wife. I took off my backpack and put it on the ground, unzipped it, grabbed the keys to the locks and the passports, and left it wide open right there on the floor of the train station. Time seemed to slow down, and I slowed down to match its pace. The words of Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's greatest swordsman, came into my head. From his Book of Five Rings, I remembered the section on rhythm. It reads, "First of all, learn the rhythm which is appropriate and differentiate it from the rhythms which are inappropriate. Your mastery of the way cannot be considered firm unless you can avoid being drawn into the rhythm of the opponent. Victory is achieved in the way of conflict by ascertaining the rhythm of each opponent and by attacking with the rhythm not anticipated by the opponent and by use of rhythm in the abstract." Clouseau was my opponent. There were people passing all around us, and the train announcements were now adding a surreal element to the situation as they blared in the background. We unlocked our suitcases as directed. Inspector Clouseau, the man clearly in charge, had taken a particular interest in me. "Where are you coming from?" He had our passports and clearly knew. "We're coming from Amsterdam." "Did you smoke cannabis in Amsterdam?" It was becoming a public interrogation at the Gare Du Nord. He was playing a game with me. People began to slow as they passed, gawking at the spectacle. "Doesn't everyone?" I asked. He snapped at me. "I didn't ask if everyone smoked cannabis. I asked if you smoked cannabis in Amsterdam." Yes, I did. The truth. By this time, my wife was being asked if she had any cannabis in the bags by the woman cop, who was now speaking English to her after having seen our passports. But right then, Inspector Clouseau turns from me and asks my wife a few feet away, "Did he bring any cannabis from Amsterdam?" She looked at me and asked, "Did you?" "No, I didn't," I replied. It was an I Love Lucy moment, and my wife was about to win an Emmy for this performance. I looked back at Inspector Clouseau and realized he thought he had apprehended couriers when he saw two unaccompanied women with large suitcases, and that maybe I was part of the scheme, but we turned out to have American passports, and somehow that didn't fit the profile. The dog was sniffing our suitcases with little interest, but my backpack was on the ground a few feet away with the hashish in double-zip sandwich bags, sealed. I never looked at it. The dog sniffed, and the inspector shifted his weight to look at his female colleague. Clouseau walked away to confer with the woman inspector. They talked quietly off to the side for what seemed to be an interminable length of time, which was in fact no more than 10 minutes. And somehow I was reminded of Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. Standing with my wife, we talked about schedules and taking a taxi and going to Italy, and when were we going to be cut loose. The inspector broke off the conversation with his colleague eventually and walked over and handed me our passports and said, "You are free to go. Time to make an exit." I put the passports in my backpack and we zipped the suitcases and locked them. And I tossed the keys to the suitcase locks in there, zipped it shut, and hoisted it on my back, hashish intact. Grabbing our luggage handles, we made our best nonchalant departure from the Gare Du Nord. Walking out, we hailed a taxi to take us across Paris to the Gare Lyon. As the taxi pulled away from the Gare du Nord, we glanced back to see if anyone was following. How silly, I would later think. We arrived at the Gare Lyon without incident. The Gare Lyon is another architectural wonder with a large clock tower in one corner. We boarded the Eurostar for Florence and felt a sense of release as the train began to move, gradually speeding south from Paris. In the late afternoon, the train headed up into beautiful alpine valleys. The Alps rose on both sides, and the sun went down. We upgraded to a berth and slept as the train passed through Switzerland on the way to Milano, and then on to Firenze. You've been listening to Cali High episode 65, The Gare Du Nord. This is the fifth in a new series called A Work in Progress, a Retrospective of Adventures. Written, produced, and recorded by Vince Nicoletti. Our featured music, a rare recording of William Orbit live at KSRW from 1993. Incidental music, Vince Nicoletti. Cali High's theme, written and recorded by Vince Nicoletti, Jordan Webb, and Namir Blade. Cali High podcast and theme are copywritten, and the logo is trademarked. Please like, follow, and subscribe to Cali High on YouTube. Email us with any questions to calihighpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Instagram at Cali High LA, and all podcast platforms in audio, pretty much. Cali High is a Cenzo Nico production. Stay safe and be blessed.